Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity and into light. Much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East. The whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been freed. United, the peace-loving nations have demonstrated in the West that their arms are stronger by far than the might of dictators or the tyranny of military cliques that once called us soft and weak. The power of our peoples to defend themselves against all enemies will be proved in the Pacific War as it was proved in Europe.
Historic pictures of the last days of the war in Europe show American and Russian troops as they joined at Torgau on the River Elbe, splitting German armies in two. United States General Reinhardt meets Red Army General Rusakov, a meeting that spelled out certain German defeat. At Allied Mediterranean headquarters in Italy, the Germans unconditionally give up all of Italy and southern Austria. In civilian clothes, representatives of the German armies signed the surrender document. General W.D. Morgan, representing Supreme Mediterranean Commander Alexander, signs for the Allies. Preceding the final capitulation at Reims, this surrender eliminated 1 million German troops. Inside Germany itself, the Allies seized the famous Stadium of Nuremberg, scene of countless Nazi party rallies. With the capture of this famous southern German city, the American flag flouts out the swastika. In a symbolic gesture, American troops destroy the Nazi party emblem.
And it's on the network.
Whoa. You do not know how computer viruses work if you're trying to pull that shit. Especially a network run by someone who's dealt with computer networking since 97.
Right.
Since Token Ring, in other words. Or, yeah, before or after Token Ring?
No. No. In order for a downloaded virus to get onto a computer, that computer has to be in contact with the source that actually transfers the file. So if you have a network, even just regular Ethernet, and I download something onto another computer on the network, it's going to affect that computer on the network. Now, if there are files that are then shared to to other nodes on the network, then you could potentially get propagation depending on how the virus is constructed. But not
propagation again.
Yeah, except not if there's no file transfers between. See, when one computer is a Mac and one is a PC, I don't transfer files between them because it's a fucking bitch and a half.
But if if you by accident unknowingly download a self-executable file that has been designed to spread itself on the local network.
What part of I don't download shit onto this computer did you not hear about?
As far as you know.
I'm the one with the password. I'm the only one who uses it. I know exactly what the fuck is on this computer. Do you really want to? No. No. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And here's the thing.
I'm going for alcohol.
I have dealt with far too many fucking people who think they are right for no goddamn reason other than they cannot admit they were wrong. Do not try me tonight, Bo. My patience is fucking gone.
Right.
And I can honestly say that I am not an IT specialist. I do not know about IT security.
I have been dealing with I have been dealing with computers, especially IT, since the mid-90s. Yes, when I was still in school, I was starting to do this shit. There's a reason why people want to hire me to do stuff like this, and I tell them flat out, you can't afford me.
I can't afford you either, just saying.
Question is,
Right. I'm not touching that one.
I was given on a golden platter.
well,
Not my style, Pure. You know that.
You don't know until you tried it.
Oh no. This motherfucker, he's been around for years. He was one of the first... He was one of the first ones that actually, when I said, no, I wouldn't come even close to Megan Fox. No, not at all. Nowhere fucking close. And wait a minute, what was your reaction there, buddy?
It's been so long ago, I can't even remember now.
Yeah,
It's been that long ago. Yeah. What is it? Fucking 5 years now?
fuck, about that long, yeah. Shit.
You've had my home address and phone number for like 3 of them.
Oh, God. From LRJ88, I worked at a place where my boss had downloaded and opened a file called yourwifenaked.exe.
Excuse me while I take off my glasses and slap my face. Where am I wrong?
interesting. Damn.
If you open a file with that name, you deserve all the problems that you
I
get.
was gonna say, you kind of deserve it.
I concur.
Well, hey, now we're only at 76% drop frames instead of the 97 we were getting fucking before.
Yippee.
Now here's the interesting part is before on the other stream, because I just completely made a new stream, and instead of dropping out to 0 and it's sitting at 0 transmission, it's still dropping for no fucking reason whatsoever, because I even did a speed test on my internet connection, and to say that my upload speed is in the gigabytes, bit of an understatement. So again, there is no fucking reason other than the reception end on why there have been these issues.
Yeah, I mean, Discord did suffer something stupid today. I wonder if it's not just Discord, but, you know, a more wide audience trend.
I'm beginning to believe that OBS and YouTube are in a conspiracy together against Jared ever streaming again, and tonight is the first of many.
Well, I did change the title of the previous one to "Fuck You, YouTube."
Yeah.
Okay, does an issue with the Guild Wars 2 servers have anything to do with it? I don't know the game. I'm looking at Down
Neither do
Detector.
I.
Hold on, Alan. I'll screen share and we will answer your question appropriately here.
Don't pull up a Kara's one. What, Bo?
Oh, that video. Yes.
You know what?
Yes,
you know
that
what,
is
You
needed.
just need to watch. You don't need to hear the sound. You just need to watch.
Yeah, just watch. Just watch what goes into this. First,
5
look at
gallons.
this. Look at the size of the thing.
That's 5 gallons for you.
That's 18.7 liters, I think.
So that's Everclear.
3
And
bottles.
that's what
Everclear is.
No, not pineapple. Not pine. Oh, wait, it's not pizza. Never mind.
Yeah, pineapple on this is acceptable. So is orange.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know what the hell he's doing here. How do you connect a blender to that thing?
Jay,
Blender.
Oh, who says you need a blender?
Jay Brown, here is a target for your Kara soundboard. You need to catch Kara saying this line.
No.
Ooh, I'm scared. And I have a pizza.
Huh?
Next up, after this, who wants to take a guess? Jared already knows.
Yeah, I already know.
Vodka.
I don't know. I'm drinking beer.
Now, are
3
those?
bottles of
All
vodka.
3 of them. Nice.
Now the question
Now we
is,
need some tequila.
are those 750 or liter bottles of vodka?
750.
Yeah.
They're all
thought so.
750.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the 50s.
And that right there is what? Mouthwash or something?
Tequila.
Close enough.
I'm not into this.
Now we
Tequila.
got the rum.
Now rum.
Tequila.
Now pineapple.
This is the first sentence in the response to, so what brings you to the ER tonight?
Right?
Oh, well, no. So here's the thing. While you watch this guy putting the fruit juices in to go with all of that wonderful mix of alcohol, anyone want to take some guesses at what the drink is actually called?
Screwdriver.
Drink.
And what the ABV is.
No,
I really
Screwdriver
want to know.
is just vodka and orange juice. This is
Right.
Everclear vodka, tequila, rum, pineapple juice, orange juice, and Hawaiian punch.
I mean,
I
it's
know.
almost like
That-
like a tequila sunrise, but not.
No.
That's a hangover.
That's what we call in the Navy a nightcap.
Or
Call that a
Or really, it's called.
Police asks,
A
in
bad
case the
day?
police asks at a party, it's just non-alcoholic punch.
jungle juice. That's what it's normally called.
That,
Say
Well,
that.
it was-
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I only asked about the Absolute vodka because normally when Rosie was drinking, she would buy cheap, horrid alcohol, not good stuff. So finding that I had a quarter of a bottle of raspberry Absolute and half a bottle of plain Absolute vodka
Sounds like
hiding
a
in
good
the
time.
kitchen. Yeah, I
love that.
I might
Alright.
actually have to drink it.
All right.
It's actually good.
All right. So I'm going to have some fun because y'all motherfuckers are now muted from the stream. I'm actually going to end up coming back to this point and clipping it because guess what? The upload status went to green and is fucking staying there. So for everyone, we're actually going to kind of technically, in a way, sort of, start over. And you're actually going to get to see the intro video without any fucking buffering. So yeah.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity and into light. Much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East. The whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been freed. United, the peace-loving nations have demonstrated in the West that their arms are stronger by far than the might of dictators or the tyranny of military cliques that once called us soft and weak. The power of our peoples to defend themselves against all enemies will be proved in the Pacific War as it was proved in Europe.
Historic pictures of the last days of the war in Europe show American and Russian troops as they joined at Torgau on the River Elbe, splitting German armies in two. United States General Reinhardt meets Red Army General Rusakov, a meeting that spelled out certain German defeat. At Allied Mediterranean headquarters in Italy, the Germans unconditionally give up all of Italy and southern Austria. In civilian clothes, representatives of the German armies signed the surrender document. General W.D. Morgan, representing Supreme Mediterranean Commander Alexander, signs for the Allies. Preceding the final capitulation at Reims, this surrender eliminated 1 million German troops. Inside Germany itself, the Allies seized the famous Stadium of Nuremberg, scene of countless Nazi Party rallies. With the capture of this famous southern German city, the American flag flouts out the swastika. In a symbolic gesture, American troops destroy the Nazi Party emblem.
And with that, we are officially here for the week. And yes, for those who didn't know, May 8th, 1945, Germany officially surrenders and starts signing the peace documents that officially end World War II in the European theater. Now, there's just something magnificent about seeing a overly used piece of iconography of a horrendous governing body being absolutely destroyed and having debris flying hundreds of yards from where it once was. So yes, we are here. We are here to both celebrate, commemorate the day that many people know as VE Day, Victory in Europe. The end of hostilities, the official end of hostilities in the European theater that started in the late 30s and went until May of 1945. 75 frickin' years later. And it's almost like some people forget what's gone on there. And actually forget just how many nations were involved in what branches of the military service were actually involved. Like, Wait, were some of you aware that there's actually there was a fourth military branch involved from the U.S. alone, and back in World War II? It wasn't just the Army.
I know.
Well,
it couldn't be the Space Force, could it? I had to. I'm sorry.
Well, no, because let's think about it. The Air Force wasn't a thing yet. They were still the Army Air Corps, so that you got the Army, you got the Navy, you got the Marines. What would the? I did say 4.
Yeah.
Could that be the I don't know, the Navi? I think they're called Navi.
You can smack him, Jared.
I can do better.
Navi, maybe.
That would be that organisation you're always taking the mickey out of, wouldn't it? The United States Coast Guard.
Oh yes, the Puddle Pirates.
who drove all the landing craft?
Absolutely. They were the
Up
ones
onto the beaches.
that did most of the driving of the boats, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk a little bit about some of the things that the Coast Guard did, because a lot of people forget about, we're like the redheaded stepchildren of the military sometimes. And the Coast Guard has been involved in every major conflict since its inception, and they had a huge part in Normandy and World War II in general. And so I'm hoping I will be able to talk about that a little bit today. So, yeah.
No, and that's what it was, because let's start with the oft overlooked bit of it, because it's just that. A lot of people, when they think ships and transporting across the ocean, they immediately think the Navy. Well, let's actually look at the actual dates. I mean, how old is the U.S. Coast Guard at this point?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. 250. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I need to bring up. I'm trying to think.
I
have it up.
Oh.
Where is it?
When you really look at the history of the branch, the Coast Guard has been so utilized for so many different actual taskings that it's kind of easy to forget that it was one group that has actually done a lot of things.
We like to always say, because of how small we are, as a comparison, the amount of people in the entire Coast Guard back when I was in was the same that was on the New York City Police Department. So that's comparison, and their jobs are to protect our homeland, which includes all of our shorelines. And during times of war, we often go to wherever the war zone is, and many times do supportive actions. And I know that my dad was also in the Coast Guard as well, and he was a BM. He was a bosun mate, and he did a lot of work with training. So he was on. He has a lot of law enforcement training and things like that, and he would go and teach the Marines and the Navy and the Army different tactics and things like that. And that's all things that have been continued since even before World War II. So, and most people don't realize how involved the Coast Guard is in these wars. But in fact, a lot of the times, even one of the really coolest things that I found out about when I was looking into World War II when I first joined was that not only did the Coast Guard provide boats and manpower and things like that, oftentimes oftentimes they would actually drive even the Navy boats and things like that as well. And most people don't even know about that. And so it's really cool to find out some of the kind of standout moments of the Coast Guard. If you want to hear about a really cool story, I actually wrote down some notes about Normandy that I think that maybe you guys might want to hear about. In specific, the Marine landing craft, I don't know.
The Higgins boats.
Yeah, the Higgins boats. And you can see some of the pictures of it on here as well. The LCI. We used to call them the lousy civilian idea. It's what we used to call them. So every time I see that, I think of that every time. But they go like they have the flat bottom boat part, and you see a picture kind of up on the top of that one website that I sent to you. But they are not very agile, and they have a flat bottom boat, and they would pack in all of these infantrymen, and they're inside, and the boats would be listing. And one story I heard was that everybody would get seasick, and that they would do a standard issue of one throw up bag. And so the smell inside of this enclosed space as they're going listing makes for a pretty horrible situation. They're cold, they're wet, pretty much no matter where you were wet, and bailing out water. They'd have the pumps going and stuff like that. They go in at about, they go pretty slow actually when they're approaching like the main beach, like 12 knots or so. So not too fast, but the Coast Guard actually came in a few different waves to first, number one, clear up the main channels. They had two main channels that they had to come in. And what they're realizing is that the Germans had set up these obstacles on the beach that were, and then they buried these mines and things in there. But what they realized, what I guess the Allied, the Americans, yeah. And they were actually paying attention to the tides. And what they realized is that at low tide, you could actually see where you could easily find the mines and things like that. So they came up with they devised a plan, and they actually set up a ghost army. And I think it was led by Patton as well.
Yeah, Patton was assigned as the leader, and they were setting up across from Calais because, well, that was the shortest crossing over the channel. So it made the most sense for them to use that point as the embarkation and landing point for the invasion of mainland Europe.
Yeah,
especially as Hitler was absolutely convinced that was where we were going to land.
Exactly, and that was the smart part about it, is they're able to send like this pretend army to the area that everybody is talking about, and they had dummy vessels, they had dummy actual radio. They were like just saying bogus stuff and to confuse the Germans, and so it's just pretty cool that they were able to do that.
Can I just say something quickly, yeah. Coral? With that ghost army, number 617 Squadron from the Royal Air Force, who were famous for blowing up the Mona Dam, on the night of D-Day, They didn't drop any bombs, but they dropped a shit ton of window, which is the little foil strips for spoofing radar. And they flew in formation in sort of in ovals across the English Channel at the point towards Calais where the Germans expected the invasion, chucking out the window so that they looked like a fleet of ships coming to do the invasion.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And the only fire that this squadron received was the German shore batteries trying to bombard the ships, which was how successful that operation was.
That's
so
awesome.
They didn't drop a bomb, they didn't fire a shot, but they convinced the Germans that there was a fleet coming across the English Channel.
That's wonderful.
Thankfully, the Nazis weren't completely off mark in this case.
Well, and when
they
you
didn't fire them.
Well, and when you think about it, a lot of people may think was like, well, isn't radar supposed to be really accurate? Radar was in its infancy at the time, and you weren't getting the exact positional data that you get from a radar system now. It was quite literally, okay, in this bearing, at this elevation angle, we're getting a return at approximately this distance. It was very rudimentary at that point still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that a lot of the Coast Guard as well, like there was about 60 or so 83 footers that are patrol boats that were out trying to help look for like on anti-submarine duty and things like that. So they tried to, because sonar was in its infancy, sometimes they would have to just look out with a telescope or binoculars, and that was all really. So, but yeah, it was really cool. So there was what was one of the other ones? So that we had the Coast Guard coming in at two different channels. So on the first wave, they had to first clear those channels, and there was a lot of boats that ran aground. There was a whole bunch of obstacles that were in the water that they had to try to clear. And there's actually a story about a boat that had gotten it as it was coming forward. It actually got the mine had exploded and left a big, huge gap on the forward compartment. And at the same time, the German batteries were they pummeled the boat at the same time. So it basically looked like Swiss cheese. And as they dropped the aft and the landing ramps, they couldn't get all the way up into the beach. So the soldiers would actually have to jump into the water. If they even got to the water, they're basically just the fire just completely it was easy pickings because they're all narrowed into this little box, and everybody just tried to get into the water, and then they would also get shot in the water because they had such a long way to get to the other side. And then on top of that, then they have like this no man's land that has like no cover that they'd have to run across to try to get to an area where they can start their fight. So a lot of people did not make it to the actual beach. And there was this one boat that I was talking about, obviously had a lot of, when they tried to pull back over to the transport area, a lot of the water obviously came in through all of the different holes and things like that. And while they did manage to get over to the USS Samuel Chase, getting like some of the injured they're trying to pick up out of the water and things like that, the boat actually did end up capsizing. And the crew saw that where it was going to really become a hazard to navigation. So the crew actually had to go back onto the boat, put some explosives on the hull of the ship, and blow it to smithereens, so that way people wouldn't run aground on it, on a boat that was already destroyed. So it's kind of cool to find out some of the things that the Coast Guard had to do and kind of consider while they were not only bringing in infantrymen, but also after the first wave, they actually had a second wave, which had the underwater demo team that would come in and try to destroy the obstructions that were on the beach, so that way they would be able to have the other waves come in and not have to worry about those mines that are on the beach. And it's the first wave, obviously we took a lot of hits. The second wave, not as much, but they still
significant.
Because I want to say out of 12 demolition teams, only 2 out of the 12 survived. And so we got a lot of people, but it was because of that they were able to do what they were able to do once they got onto the beach. So it's pretty incredible.
Go ahead, Alan.
I was going to say, if you want a really good overview of what happened on the 6th of June, I really recommend reading Cornelius Ryan's The Longest Day. It is it's a really good, I mean, it's a good movie, don't get me wrong, but it's a really good book to read, because it gives that really good overview of the experiences of all of the troops on both sides. The Brits, the Canadians, the Americans on both their beaches on Omaha and Utah Beach.
Yeah.
Us on Sword, the Canadians on Gold, and even the differences between one end of a beach and one end of a beach, basically walking out of the landing craft, walking up the beach and walking up and off the beach without pretty much any opposition at all, and then other end of a beach, hard bloody fighting for several hours.
Yeah, and that was one of the things. Is you had that inconsistency along the Normandy landings. And we actually had a question from the live chat from Cody. There's a researcher saying that Pointe du Hoc was bad intel and the Germans had moved most of the firepower back. Is there any truth to that? I'm not sure about the bad intel part, but the Germans actually did end up... because of their command structure at the time, a lot of their reserves, a lot of their mechanized infantry and heavy artillery were not involved in the initial bits of the landings, and it was because Hitler, being who he was, he wanted to be the one to give the command and control for what was going on, and there were delays on communication on the German side.
Ooh, I got a thing to add to that as well. There's also one of the things that a lot of the information that I've been talking about, you can find on history.uscg.mil. But there's actually an account that talks about one of the main problems that they had was weather. They actually canceled one of the invasions because the weather was just absolutely awful. And so there's actually a story where the Germans had decided they're definitely, the weather is just going to be completely shitty. So this one guy actually went home to go see his family and stuff, because he felt so confident that the Allies were not going to invade during that time. And then, of course, they looked at the meteorologists and stuff and determined that they had this 2-day gap that they could do it. So the Allied forces decided to push forward and go. And one of the other things that I found when I was looking up a lot of this stuff is that one of the boats actually was off by like 1,500 yards from where they were planning on landing. And so they actually ended up, it was kind of a happy accident because the area that they were at wasn't as didn't have as much people there, Germans
As
fighting.
much resistance.
Not as much resistance and things like that. So they kind of we had a lot of things that could have gone a lot worse. And because of these happy little accidents and people making mistakes and stuff, it kind of helped us in the long run. So, which is kind of awesome about too.
To answer the question about Pont de Hoc, the Germans hadn't actually yet installed the guns in the emplacements.
Yeah,
the big guns.
Yeah,
the artillery. So.
Yeah, because that's the thing. A lot of people don't realize is that a lot of the actual military assets that helped Germany make that headway and actually get over and take control in the parts of France that they did and everything were actually built up in the decade leading to the invasion of Poland. It wasn't that they had that economic prowess, that manufacturing prowess that is the ultimate reason why the U.S. performed the way it did, especially later in the war, and why Yamato was actually said when the Japanese failed to get the carriers out of Pearl Harbor, he said, "We've just awoken the beast." Because he realized that with the natural resources that the U.S. had in its own country, it did not have to go out and gain these resources. It could all be produced in-house and supplied in-house effectively, and that was what really gave the Allies a leg up, was what the U.S. was able to provide. Even before direct involvement, the Lend-Lease Act, the supporting with the materials. I mean, Alan...
Yeah. What you mean? What nearly broke my country?
Well, to be fair, no one was really good.
Especially post-war, when the Marshall Plan was rebuilding Germany, because we'd literally wiped it out, and we were having to make do amend with factories that had been partially destroyed by the Blitz, and repay huge amounts of Lend-Lease money.
Garrett, that was Yamamoto. No one was listening to Yamamoto.
Yeah.
They've been taking his advice. They never even would have attempted to attack the U.S.
No.
But, yeah, I mean, Germany's biggest problem was that unlike the rest of the Allies, they didn't actually switch to a war production footing at all. So they, or certainly not until well after they invaded the Soviet Union, which was, in hindsight, a really bad move.
You think?
But you can. I mean, if you actually consider things, not ignoring what happened, it wasn't quite as crazy as it seemed in June 41. In June 41, it didn't seem quite so crazy as it turned out to be.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the Germans knew that they were going to have to fight the Soviets at some point, and they thought that June 41 was going to be it, because, remember, America wasn't in the war at that point. Britain was barely hanging on, we'd barely managed to not be invaded in 40. And Hitler never really actually wanted to invade the UK, did he? That was part of the problem. And they didn't really have the wherewithal to do it, even if, because they didn't have the landing craft and that sort of thing. They had to improvise stuff.
Yeah, because most of what the Wehrmacht, the German army, was actually trained for and experienced with was a true land war throughout Central Europe. And you have the river crossings, but not major amphibious operations that would have to take place.
Yeah. I mean, they were the masters of. They took our plans for combined operations and mastered it.
Yeah,
and that there were also, I mean, they didn't really want to invade Denmark as a primary goal either. They just did it as a stepping stone to reach Norway, because Norway had some optimal places for creating submarine bases.
Well, not just that. There were other aspects too. So a little thing that people don't always remember is, just like the U.S. had the Manhattan Project, Nazi Germany also had its own atomic research and need and desire for the want of heavy water. And where did they get their supply of it from?
Yeah, that's right. Scandinavia, more precisely, Norway.
Yeah. So a lot of things, when you look at military operations and who is going to what areas, you got to think about what purpose is there, what gain would there be in that area. Like a lot of Japan's expansion in the Pacific Theater was for one primary reason. They needed raw materials to keep the war effort going.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. They also invaded Norway because of their iron ore deposit. Not deposits, but their resource of iron ore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
I think the iron ore was more important than the heavy water, really.
Yeah. Well, it was that access to raw materials for the projects that they were working on and the production that they needed in general, not one over the other. It was that wealth of resources that you don't have in Germany.
It's pretty consistent.
Oh, and of course,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that it's pretty consistent with war in general, that the country that controls the resources most likely is going to be the one that's going to come out ahead. And in this case, having the U.S., which had a lot of industry at the time, and everybody coming together, and then you have places like Britain as well coming in, and we had a flood of resources and manpower and things like that, and that's all going to be beneficial in the end.
Okay, so got two good comments in the live chat right now. I'll start with the one that's a little more serious from Rodent No Last Name. The reason Germany was in Brazil was for guano. Nitrates for explosives. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the organic nature and sources of material that actually go into some of the weapons and materials that are used. Now, the better comment, Craven Mordick. The goal of the Manhattan Project was actually to recreate the amount of power in a Chuck Norris roundhouse kick. They didn't even come close.
Classic.
Yeah. I know one of the reasons Germany went after Norway, apart from the iron ore, is because they didn't want to have happen in Norway with the Royal Navy what ended up happening in Iceland. Us going in there and saying, we don't care you're neutral, we don't care you're not playing, you're important to us, your bit of land is really important, and we're having it anyway. And that was their big fear of the Royal Navy getting bases in Iceland as well. In Norway as well.
Well, yeah,
that was
because
another reason for them to invade. Because remember, we had we had basically had an invasion fleet on the way to Norway when the Germans went in.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. A lot of people kind of forget the geography that they were dealing with on that aspect. There aren't many deep water ports that Germany had in their own land, which was one of the reasons why, when they invaded France, where did they actually occupy? Northern and central France. Where did they let the Vichy regime do their thing? Southern France. Why? Because the Germans wanted access directly to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, Brest and Le Havre.
Yep.
Mostly.
Yeah, and they turned them into primarily, well, if not entirely, U-boat bases, which they still have some of the more interesting and robust structures that actually... the Brits actually dedicated a lot of development into one single bomb with the sole intent of getting through those submarine bunkers.
Two bombs, Tall Boy and Grand Slam. 5 tons and 10 tons.
Well, see, I thought Grand Slam was part of the same project. It was just a beefier version.
It kind of was, but it was twice as big. I think the best story is 617 Squadron, again, dropped Grand Slams on... actually, no, probably they were Tall Boys because of the range. But anyway, they dropped bombs on the U-boat pens at Hamburg. And after Hamburg fell, apparently, Wing Commander Willie Tate, who was at the time the squadron commander, went over to Germany to inspect the damage that the Tall Boys had done. And they get in, they fly over there and they get in a jeep and they drive up to the pens and they go in, and the whole place is a complete mess. And turns out that we hadn't actually at that point captured the U-boat pens. So Willie Tate and his driver end up taking the surrender of about 500 Kriegsmarine submariners and support staff in the U-boat pens at Hamburg, the two of them on their own, unarmed. But the Germans actually thought the bombs that were used were rocket propelled in order to get them through the concrete, because they went through tens of meters of concrete and then exploded. Because they were well supersonic by the time they got to the ground after being dropped at 22,000 feet, which was as high as they could get them, although the original Barnes-Wallis design altitude was 30,000 feet. There just wasn't an aircraft that could lift 5 or 10 tons to 30,000 feet. Sorry, this is one of my interests, is World War II history, especially the RAF and the aviation side of it.
Well, yeah.
Well, since today is the 75th anniversary of VE Day, I thought it would be appropriate for us to ask Alan, after it was announced, did you guys have like a big party that night?
I don't remember if my mother does. My mother was my mother was 18. Well, actually, she was just coming up to her 18th birthday on VE Day. So, yeah, my mum remembers it.
I'm trying to say you're old, goddammit, Alan.
I know you're trying to say I'm old. I'm the old. I have already admitted that I think I'm the old fart here.
For this particular panel, yes.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you want to hear more stories about from the mouths of the people that were actually there, there's some very interesting interviews at the Library of Congress, but also there is a nonprofit, in their own words, where they basically you can listen to these people telling these stories. One of them in particular that I found was really interesting was Marvin Parrott, and he has a really great story to share. He's one of the Coast Guard, I believe it's a bosun mate. But
There you
anyway,
go.
highly recommend it. It's again on. You can find them at the Library of Congress, but also on U.S. Coast Guard Mill. .mil as well, which is what's showing on the screen. There's a link to directly to it. You can listen to it. Really cool though, his story, and I think it's pretty awesome to hear it from their mouths.
Yeah, and especially because of the generation. I mean, sources like this are soon to be the only link that we have to the time period.
There's something humbling about it too, you know. I know that I will never see the things that they did and what they achieved, and I can't imagine the things that they went through because of not just that time period, but also the technology that they had at that time. And to hear them talk about like the letters that they wrote to their family, sometimes while they were on the U-boats and things like that, is really quite incredible. And so to also get their point of view years later, and some of the people that talk about their story, this is, 70, 80 years later, 75 years later. So, or excuse me, I think a lot of the recordings are like 60 years and 65 years. They've been working really hard. These nonprofits have been working really hard to get it as a audio database of these stories. And so, and they continue to do it even to this day. Like they're looking for all types of military experiences. And so I highly recommend it if you have some interesting stories and things like that. Definitely check it out. Maybe your story could be recorded for future generations.
Yeah, some stories aren't for the faint of heart, and also at the same time, some of the stories we get from our time in the military are best not shared in that sort of recorded manner.
Yeah, that is true, but at the same time, this is in some ways it's the only way that we have records of things that happen, and sometimes it's the mundane things. As I said, the stories about the soldiers puking in the boats because of the listing boat, or writing their family members because they're stuck in a boat for 2 days trying to eke out a note home just in case they die. Things like that you don't realize when you're reading through the letters too. They're heartbreaking and beautiful and interesting, and you get a really good idea of the culture of the time, and what really mattered to those people during that time, which is really something that you can't get from just a history book.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Having that personal touch is key.
Oh yeah, I was lucky that I served in a time period where I served with the 82nd Airborne Division, Charlie Company, First 504, and every year they have All American Week, where they flew in World War II vets. Some of the last, at that time in '98, a couple of the last surviving World War I servicemen, and just sitting in hotel rooms, and you got 20 guys, and you got three of these guys that been on them boats and told their stories because they loved doing it. They wanted to share that with us, and just for hours upon hours, just listening to the stories that these guys went through. And, you know, oh, hell yeah. That was the highlight of the year, other than, you know, doing our jumps.
So, from the live chat, Mark Beiser, which, by the way, happy birthday, Mark. He says, my grandfather was in the Merchant Marines during World War II because my grandmother wouldn't sign the waiver to let him volunteer for the Navy. Ended up getting 3 Liberty ships sunk out from underneath him.
Oh, jeez.
So, was he considered the bad luck charm or the good luck charm? I would
go with bad luck.
No, I would go with good luck.
thought.
Yeah, I would go with the good luck because I mean he survived.
Right.
He's the bad luck. He's the bad luck charm for everybody else on the boat.
Right.
Well,
I don't know what it was like in U.S. service, but in British service, the minute your ship got sunk, if you were in the Merchant Marine, you stopped getting paid.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Well, you're not assigned to a boat anymore.
Well, yeah. So
exactly,
you actually have reports of similar things happening in the U.S. Navy, where a ship would be sunk, it would be reported as sunk, and you would have periods where you would have survivors in the water that initially didn't get paid for that time because, well, the boat sank and they weren't sure who survived and didn't.
Oh, wow.
I mean, my father didn't serve in World War II because he was in a reserved occupation. So they would not let him volunteer. And of course, because my parents were quite old when I was born, my grandparents, both my grandfathers served in World War I.
Oh, wow.
One of whom was on the Somme.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know either of my grandfathers, but my grandmother was born before motor cars were common.
That's incredible.
And
that's the old Git thing, yeah.
Yeah, and lived to see the space shuttle.
Yeah, think about
and all the Apollo stuff, and World War One and World War Two, and the Wright brothers, and supersonic flight, and everything.
Yeah, think
what
about
a period to live through.
Yeah, I was going to say, think about all the change and everything that generation lived through. Like, you're talking going from your primary mode of transportation being either your own 2 feet or a piece of livestock to supersonic transatlantic travel aboard an aircraft to seeing rockets take off, taking people outside of Earth's atmosphere.
And to the moon.
Yeah.
And back.
My
dad was born in the 1880s.
Wow. And when you think about that,
and she was over 100 when she passed away.
Yeah, I was gonna say it almost went from the end of the. Actually, no, that was still technically part of the end of the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we had there was telegraph and telephones. I think the telephone had been invented by that point. Reliable electric light was rather novel and just in big cities.
Yeah.
Man, and all I've got to and all I've got to boast about in relation to the Second World War is my granddad, who would have been around 95-ish, I think, if he still was alive today. He built radio transceivers for the resistance back then.
Oh, wow. That's really
My
cool.
grandfather
and
landed at
built them into books and whatnot.
That's
my
awesome.
grandfather landed at Omaha Beach with the 29th Division.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Damn.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is you got to.
My-
And when you think about it, a lot of people look at the big moments like that and forget that there were other operations that led up to that.
Yeah.
So many people forget about
technically
everything
speaking-
that happened in Africa.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Africa was a
also-
completely different war almost.
As I've heard it, technically speaking, there wasn't really a break between the First and the Second World War. It was just another chapter in the same war.
Well,
as the way I've heard it.
the way there is a channel out there that I'm subscribed to that does a series that is called the Interwar Years, where they actually go year by year, nation or subject by subject, and go through that progression of, okay, we're starting with, okay, here's how World War I ended, here's what's setting up, and we already know by looking back at it, the way this is set up is just laying the groundwork for the next phase of warfare. Yeah. So you still have a break because you do have a 30-year period. You have 3 decades between. So while they are linked in cause,
there wasn't. No, it was 20. It was essentially 20 years between the First and Second World War, Jared, not 30.
30? Yeah.
Because 1918 to 1939.
Yeah.
So 20-ish.
Yeah, so you have the 20-year period between where you go from the euphoric excess of the 20s to the Great Depression and all of the political and international stuff going on, and into what allowed certain people to come into power. Now, earlier in the live chat, God's Auditor mentioned that both his grandfathers fought in World War II, technically against each other. One was a part of the Italian Air Force under Mussolini, and let me go back here, and the other grandfather was in the U.S. Navy. So not direct, but you do have that interesting give and take, and especially when you look at the history that Italy was on the side of the Allies in World War I. And part of why they switched is because a good portion of the population in Italy felt they got shafted at the as the spoils of World War I were being doled out.
I could kind of see that, but
well,
I mean, we don't really have that good of a record.
Well, yeah. Well, when you look at it, what they attribute it primarily to it is how certain allied nations actually got what were seen as valuable overseas assets that used to belong to the Central Powers, while you have the Italians and the Japanese who wanted more than what they got and decided, well, you know what? If you're not going to treat us equitably, fuck you, we're going to take what we want. And that's ultimately what ended up happening through the 20 years between the wars is you have those little bits and pieces, those paper cuts here and there.
Japan was on the Allied side as well in World War I, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yes, it was.
So there really is so much nuance that took place between the two that there is justification to logically put them together as one greater event, but at the same time, there was such a break in time and such a break in major hostilities that it realistically can be, and because of some of the combatant changing sides, really does become two separate military actions when you look at it that way. But the way one ended directly attributed to the beginnings of the other.
Well, one of the things that surprises me is how the fact that the Washington Naval Treaty was mostly about us, you lot, and Japan still looking at each other as enemies.
Yep.
From a naval point of view. You know, because the Royal Navy didn't want the US Navy getting too big. And the same with the Japanese. And of course, the US Navy not wanting the Royal Navy to get too much bigger either.
Well, yeah, because by that point is U.S. was
So
in
still considering fighting each other.
Well, yeah, so the British Empire was still calling itself just that, the British Empire, because
And y'all had,
still was.
Yeah,
It still
y'all had
was.
y'all had the primo navy back then too.
Yeah.
I mean, y'all.
Oh yeah.
But what really gets interesting is when you look at it, the U.S. was imperial in actions, but not in name, because we actually did between the wars actually had quite the sizable chunk of overseas holdings that were not states.
Yeah, I mean, because you had the Philippines after the after your little fracas with Spain.
Yep. And there it was around that time we ended up getting our foothold in Hawaii and the other archipelagos in the area, which is where Wake and Midway come into play.
We still got a
Also,
tiny
you
little
had
chunk of Cuba.
Yep.
I thought you had Hawaii much earlier than I thought you had the I thought you had Hawaii in the 19th century.
That's when we started going there and everything, but for it to be the player that it was, it came into more prominence during World War One.
Right.
Oh, Rodent No Less Name. Before I go, both our enemies in World War II are now allies. It's funny how that works. I look here in a couple months. We're actually going to have the VJ special as well, Victory in Japan, because we dropped a massive piece of ordnance on them, and now look.
You never know what the future holds.
But
much
Jared,
all our
that
World-
was just one bomb, though.
Pretty much all our World War II allies or enemies are now allies, and a few of our allies are enemies. So you know.
No.
Yeah.
Well.
What I find amazing is when you look back into deep history and back to the 1800s, how much the U.S. and the UK were such diehard enemies. I mean, shit, in 1812, you invaded us temporarily. And then 100 years later, we're BFFs.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, let's face it. In your is it your national anthem? There is some mention of some of the Red Rocket's glare.
Yeah, yeah.
When we were firing rocket artillery at some
Baltimore.
building that we managed to smash up so much in a city called Washington, in the District of Columbia, that you had to repaint the damn thing white.
Yeah, I'm teaching my kids right now, since they don't have school. Once a week we have a history class, and we're watching cartoons on the American Revolution to teach them how terrible the British actually are.
Thank you.
Hey, we're just showing them what's actually happened.
You invaded Whitehaven.
Last week's episode, we watched about the turtle. America's first submarine.
Oh,
well, there you
Furball. When all this shit changes, and if you and the family have time off, let me know, because there's a mock-up of the Bushnell, the turtle, just down the road from me.
Sweet.
Shut up. That's awesome.
And what's nice is, last I knew, that facility was still free access. Well, is no charged access into the building, because it is actually funded by the U.S. Navy quite a bit, is actually the submarine museum, which is literally right outside of the gate. Well, one of the gates, the main gate at the sub base in Groton.
I think they would like that. They very much enjoyed the cartoon of the turtle. We're watching Liberty's Kids.
Okay.
I'd never watched that series, but they've got some big name actors as their voice actors. I mean, Walter Cronkite is Ben Franklin.
Good call.
Oh,
Yeah.
he has an iconic voice.
Yeah.
Back when you could actually trust journalists to have a measure of integrity.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, with losing the touch of that direct linkage to time periods of history like this, it really does make you look at, and you have to appreciate how rapidly things can change. Because when you think about it, Soviet Russia was our ally during World War II, and even early on, they were a part of the Lend-Lease Act. They were getting military hardware from the U.S. to help their war effort. Granted, they initially didn't like the P-47 and ended up developing their own aircraft anyways, but they still learned some of the advances that the U.S. and the U.K. had made.
I thought it was the P-39 that they had, which they actually quite liked.
Yeah, well, it was the 39 they liked. They ended up getting the Thunderbolt.
I didn't think they got Thunderbolts, because I didn't think the Thunderbolt was around that early.
They were still
in big production.
The Thunderbolt was mid-war. It wasn't late war. It actually did a good number of the fighting, especially in Europe, once Normandy happened. And before that,
no, I know it was. I didn't think it was. I didn't think it was around in big numbers for Lend-Lease to Russia. I didn't think the Russians got P-47s. I thought they got P-39s and the Airacobra and the King Cobra, which was an up-engined Airacobra, and I can't remember, P-69. I think it was P-60. It was a P-60 something. I think the second Bell Airacobra. I thought the Soviets got those, and they actually quite liked them.
Well, the pilot number of the pilots did. A lot of the maintainers and especially the bureaucrats didn't.
I think part of the problem with Lend-Lease, of course, is that the Soviet system didn't like the fact that they had to have anything from
a capitalist nation. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you in the official histories, the Lend-Lease stuff is kind of glossed over. A bit like when we flew out Hurricanes to them and Spitfires to them.
It was the King Cobra, by the way. The P-63 was the one that
63. Okay.
Yeah, and I know they got P-39s, P-39s, which was the Airacobra as well. Interesting aircraft. putting the engine behind the pilot.
Yeah, well, and when you really look at especially everything that went on there, like the P-51 wasn't the aircraft that a lot of people remember until a particular engine was put into it.
Oh yeah, and that was actually not an American. That was actually a British design requisition that was given to North American in 1940. That had nothing at all to do with the US Air Force. It was essentially a British design or a British requirement that North American built an aircraft for. Yeah, unfortunately, the A had the Allison engine.
Yeah.
Although it did good work as the A. Oh, I can't remember. It was an A. There was a ground attack version of it, which was, and I can't remember. I believe it was called.
That's what it was. Okay, Mark, that was the aircraft I was thinking of, not the 47, the 40. The Kitty Hawk, the Tomahawk. That one spent a lot of time in, especially China and Russia, in service there. But yeah.
The Warhawk, yeah.
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 That one got lent out a lot.
Warhawks, they all different versions of the P. In fact, the P-40 also became very good once they put Merlins in it.
Yeah, it's almost like the British used to know how to make good engines.
Oh, jeez.
What? Inline? Well, if you want a water-cooled inline V12, yeah.
There were a lot of planes running on Merlin engines in World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We might have had more planes with Merlin engines in the UK.
my favourite being the de Havilland DH-98, the Mosquito.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Two Merlin engines, 2-man crew. Could, up until the B-17G came out, could carry a heavier load of bombs to Berlin than a Flying Fortress.
Now, if I remember correctly, the Mosquito was also a wooden frame.
It was a really good attack bomber.
And when it came out, it was the fastest aircraft in the world. Because notice I said it could take a heavier bomb load to Berlin.
Yeah.
It could take that bomb load to Berlin at pretty much the speed of a Mustang.
Jeez.
They could fly fast. They could fly low.
They could fly very high.
Yep.
Simply put,
in fact,
British
the US Air Force
engineering.
operated them. You know, the US Air Force operated quite a number of Mustangs as photo and weather reconnaissance aircraft.
Yeah, amongst World War II aircraft, the Mosquito is my second favorite attack bomber.
And your favorite is?
The A-26.
Which one was
Now
that?
that's the Invader. I remember now. The A-26 is the Invader. I wish I could remember what the attack version, the ground attack version of the Mustang was. It was an A something or other, and it had a different name. Guess I better call up. Guess I better call up Mr. Google, hadn't I?
Yeah, now imagine trying to do this before the advent of the internet.
Right. Need my and before the shelves full of encyclopedias.
Been there, done that, and I like the current way better. It's easier. Well, it's quicker to find material, but at the same time, it's easier to find misinformation too.
That's true.
But
That's why it's very important always to check your sources and not just go with what you find on top of the search list.
That is unless you're checking YouTube. YouTube is always a reliable source.
Oh yeah.
Wait. I thought we were only supposed to go with the sources that we liked and made us feel good and confirmed what we were looking for to begin with.
Well, that's a given.
I know this. I know enough about aviation history to know that Wiki have got this correct. North American Aviation P-51, first flight 26th of October 1940, from a Royal Air Force requirement. Introduction, January 1942 in the Royal Air Force. Status, retired from military service 1984.
Yep.
Dominican Air Force.
Well, if you think about it,
Cost.
Context.
Well, if you think about it, some of the
$50,985 in 1985.
Wow.
It was the A36 Apache.
Okay.
And then of course you've got the F-82 Twin Mustang.
Oh well, yeah, that thing was just trip. And actually, you know what? And with it being called the Apache, that's why the attack helicopter, the Longbow, is actually considered the Apache II. No, because the F-35 is called the Lightning II, not just the Lightning, because the Lightning was another World War II era aircraft.
The only visible difference, of significance is a giant zit on top of the rotors.
Yeah, Jared, actually, it's interesting because for the Royal Air Force, the Lightning was not a World War II aircraft, but of course, it is still the Lightning II for the Royal Air Force as well.
Well,
because of that English Electric thing we used to have.
Yeah.
my all-time favorite aircraft.
I'm surprised we don't have a Canuck member with us tonight, because it would be the perfect time to mention the Avro.
The Vulcan.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what the?
I'm just salivating out.
The Arrow. Planes that if only they could have served.
Vulcan, though.
The Lightning did serve. Or our Lightning did serve. It was the TSR-2 that we had that was the bitch that got cancelled.
And all
that
because
was turning out. And then we ordered F-111s that we never got because you couldn't actually develop them properly to our requirement anyway. After all, so
the aardvark was a problem, and I see the problem being repeated with the Lightning too as well. One airframe for how many different mission profiles?
Too many.
Yeah, and then with the aardvark, now add on the sweep wing as well.
Yeah.
Although without the F-111, we would not have gotten the F-14.
Yeah, or the Tonka.
Well, that is the Tomcat, the F-14.
No, the Tonka. The Panavia Tornado.
The Tornado, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, you've heard of Tonka toys, those. Yeah, we named it after the Tonka truck because they're
durable as hell.
Durable as hell, and yeah, exactly. And we forget how long they served for. They were in the Royal Air Force service for a very long time.
Weren't they? I know they did missions in the first Gulf War, and I'm pretty sure there were some still flying in the second. But
do you know when we got rid of the GR4?
Within the last only handful of years, if I remember right.
Within the last 12 months. And
Really,
the GR1s were in service in the 70s. it served 80s, 90s, and through to pretty near to
Yeah, just shy of
40 years, 30 years, 40, hang on, 80s, 90s, zeros, 40 years.
There is an airframe that's still flying that actually beats it in longevity.
Which is?
The A4. The Skyhawk.
Oh, there's an airframe that's in service with the has been in service with the Royal Air Force since 1949.
We have some bombers that go back that far, don't we?
Well, your B-52, the last B-52 came off the production line in 1962.
Yeah, the Buff is a different beast when it comes to that. But yeah, there is 90% of the crewmen flying the B-52 are younger than the aircraft they are flying.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the RAF still has two de Havilland Canada DHC-1 Chipmunk aircraft in service as trainers.
Yeah, training aircraft, yeah.
B-52 began design in 1946.
Yep.
Yeah. And funny enough, the Chipmunk was also used by the Royal Air Force in Berlin as a reconnaissance aircraft, because they were allowed to have the Soviets didn't mind us having a training aircraft in Berlin, so that pilots could keep their hours up who were stationed there. So they very craftily would take it up and take people in the back with cameras.
Oh, we're doing a reconnaissance flight.
Because of where they were based, they could get away with flying. They were allowed to actually fly over Soviet territory. But they had to be really careful that they didn't come down.
Yeah.
Because had they been caught with cameras, that would have been big trouble.
I had a really long conversation a couple months ago with an Osprey pilot about the problems with the Osprey and his opinion of it. And he was adamant that the airframe itself, the Osprey, is an amazing craft. The problem with it is that it was developed by the specifications of the Marine Corps, and they were the project managers for it, and the Marine Corps do not know how to develop an aircraft. And the biggest difference was he's an Air Force pilot of the Osprey in comparison to the Marine Corps, whereas in the Marines, a rifleman's a rifleman's a rifleman's a rifleman, a tanker's a tanker's a tanker. You can jump from one system to the other. It's lowest common denominator. Get in there and figure it out. So they had to dumb the system down so far that any pilot graduating training could get into it. Whereas it's an extremely complex aircraft, and in the Air Force, you graduate up into more complex aircraft. And that's why all of the Ospreys that crashed were being flown by the Marines, not the Air Force.
Okay, guys, I'm going to take off. I got to go cook dinner.
All right, later.
Later, Jay.
See ya.
Yeah, have a good one.
Later, yeah.
Wow, 75 years since CE. Crazy.
That just makes it even weirder that the Marine Corps, of all forces, used the VF Osprey.
That's the Air Force tried to take the project from them, offered to take it. It's like, hey, we know how to design and follow these through to the end and make them good aircraft. And the Marines like, no, we want it our way. And that's why a bunch of them crashed.
Well, think about it this way. Let's look at it. Your three original children of the marriage that is the U.S., the U.S. government and the military, are the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. Army and Navy always got a lot of love and attention. Marine Corps, not so much. So when they got their hands on something, no, it's mine. You can't have it. And then
Isn't that the American way?
And then, oh no, there are American kids who know how to share.
Air Force is like the youngest child, you know. They get early
No. The Air Force is not just the youngest child. They are the child of the second marriage.
But we're the redheaded stepchildren. The Coast Guard is.
Who are you again?
Right. You have to
Hey, what's wrong with redheads, Jared?
I want to know now that we have Space Force, because the Coast Guard was your purpose is to guard the coasts. You're there on the coastline and then do the other stuff when the rest of us go to war. Now that space is an area that we've got military service, are we going to have like an Atmo Guard to protect us from the aliens?
That'll be part of the Coast Guard too, I'm sure.
A planetary. No, it'll be a separate service.
Security.
it will be a separate service. It will be started up as soon as we have viable longer haul craft, and you'll get the hand-me-downs of the solar system only and be the planetary defense force.
Or just not, because we get rid. Well, I say we, but you guys get rid of the orange in the chair right now, and it'll be another 50 years before it becomes a reality.
Not really, because here's the thing that a lot of people are forgetting is a lot of the developments that actually pushed Trump to saying this started back actually at the tail end of Clinton, and actually were kept along with Bush, and even Obama actually furthered it along too. These changes, these upgrades, these adaptations and increased mission profiles that NASA gets and uses their funding on are not short order projects. They're not. One of the shortest ones, actually, if you break up the space race programs to their individual programs, Apollo was the shortest one. From when they started working on it officially to when the missions started to happen. But if you look at that entire program, the entire history, it actually goes back to the foundations of NASA, and at the beginning when they started with the Mercury program, the Gemini program, and then Apollo, how they all fed into each other. That's what we're getting now. We had that progression, and then we had the time period. We had the time period of the shuttle missions, which then went into international cooperation. Now that we have the international cooperation side down, we're still furthering in building up on the ISS, which is actually going to end up being replaced by New Gateway. Which, from Gateway, we're going... It steps. Right now, the target is Mars, and actually having a manned mission to Mars. But before that, let's get our feet back wet by going to the moon, and then having the moon be the actual launching off point from our neighborhood to Mars, instead of trying to go from Earth straight to Mars. It's actually going to be a stepped progress. You go from Earth to the moon, and then from the moon to Mars.
Which makes great sense, because it's much easier to achieve escape velocity on the moon than it is on Earth.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. But no, I was just thinking that this, the Orange's idea of a space force, wouldn't that be a direct violation of the space treaty?
I don't know specifically what the Space Force's charter is.
Yeah, that's where
I don't think the Space Force is doing anything new. I think all the Space Force is doing is combining the different spatial aspects of the various services into one.
Yeah, they're essentially taking the astronaut roles and administration away from the Air Force and Navy.
And to be fair, it's like it's only like a pseudo branch anyway, because it's like
it's purely
components are-
administrative right
right.
now.
I have been told, though, that Air Force OSI is being required to redesign their badge and credentials, so it's inclusive.
What?
Yeah.
Run that by me again? I must have missed something there.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. So OSI is the investigative agency for the Air Force, and Space Force is under the Air Force. So Space Force is not going to get their own investigators. So supposedly this is secondhand information. It might be not accurate, but I hope it's real, and I find it hilarious that OSI, the Air Force Office, actually it's AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, they're being required to redesign who they are, so it's not exclusive of the space cadets.
Wow.
Well, I mean, the Navy did it in the 90s. Kind of. They went from NIST to NCIS.
Well,
And honestly, the Coast Guard had to go through something kind of similar when we were, because originally, at least when I first went into the Coast Guard, we were under the Department of the Treasury during peacetime. And then during wartime, we would switch over to the Department of Defense. But then 9/11 happened and Homeland Security was created, and then we were under that. So.
Well, Homeland Security would be the most realistic place for the Coast Guard in my mind, wouldn't it?
Once it was created, yeah.
Anyway.
Before that, it didn't have a home because, I mean, you were quasi Department of Defense. I mean, you were structured Department of similar to the Department of Defense, but you didn't fall under it. And
it was kind of a governmental version of civil defense.
And it basically caused a lot of problems with funding because of the fact that because of how small the Coast Guard was, they didn't have their own budget. And so when we were under Department of Defense, we actually had access to a lot more money than when we were under Department of Treasury.
And one of the biggest issues for why you can't be solely Department of Defense is because the Department of Defense is barred from enforcing civil law. Exactly. So under posse comitatus, I can't enforce civil law. If Coast Guard fell under DOD, you couldn't either, meaning that you couldn't drug interdict in the water.
And that's half of our stuff, and not just doing the search and rescue, the drug interdictions, but a lot of the times when we're in wartime, we're out there doing, like, checking for resources, extra fuel and arms and things like that. So we need to be able to have that. Yeah.
Well, the Coast Guard does take care of just random inspections on commercial shipping within the 12-mile limit, right?
Yep.
That's also part of the
So that's where what a lot of people don't realize is a good amount of drug interdiction that is seaborne around the U.S. is actually done by home-ported destroyers. And guess who they have to have with them whenever they make a stop?
Coasties.
Yep.
We actually have coasties stationed on the Navy boats for various reasons, which is pretty cool that we get to work with so many different military groups. But yeah, that's basically what my dad did a lot when he was in. He worked port security, and he did, half of the law enforcement stuff that he had to learn is close quarters, trying to go into, like, say, a unsecured space where there might be a baddie there or not or whatever, and just going down to trying to go down a ladder well with having your weapon drawn or not drawn and things like that. And not to mention what to look for when they're in these commercial boats. They have so many various places that things could hide.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just about drugs either. It can be fishing in forestries as well, or craggers that are
trafficking.
grabbing out human trafficking. That one as well.
Or piloting licenses.
Yep. And there's just we have a saying that we use a lot, that we're the jack of all trades and master of none. Because we literally it's everything about the Coast Guard is like the shit that you throw into the bin, and you just have to be able to do everything.
Yeah, because when you think about it, they're law enforcement, but not really. They're naval warfare, but not really.
Right.
Yeah, but then again, that could easily be turned into the positive part of it. I mean, all the other services have it easy because they have all their jobs outlined for them. It's easy compared then to the Coast Guard that has to pick up the sloppy leftovers.
Like when I was in, I did mostly sea duty when I was in. I was a gunner's mate, but I wasn't just a gunner's mate. I had to go in and I did all of like the PMS on a lot of the locks. So I was a locksmith as well. I had to do inventory.
What?
Preventative
maintenance.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking in a totally different angle there. I got confused for a second.
To be fair, Fo, the symptoms are very similar. So.
Right.
It's not wrong.
Holy shit.
Right? I'm not going to argue that.
Nice.
Really. And then, so yeah, I was a locksmith. I did the gun maintenance. We had to do inventory of all of not just the weaponry and the ammo, but also the lot stuff. I did all the ordering. Yep, I did a lot of we had to help with like doing food stores when we come into port. We'd basically become deckies for the day and have to go in all hands on deck to fill stores.
But then again, food stores replenishment is a job for all hands.
And when we
not just
and not just that too. Like whenever we would, if we go into like dry dock and stuff like that, we become again like the deckies because we're the only ones with the security clearances that can go into like those areas and do the painting, and we had to do needle gunning and things and getting up all of the paint and stuff like that and repainting, and you just become you put on all these little hats.
Oh yeah, even a ship's company in the Navy does similar thing. You have your rate, you have your specialty that you're actually assigned to the ship to do, but guess what happens whenever the ship is in port and things need to get repainted?
Yep.
It doesn't matter what your rate is. If you are E4 and below, guess what you're going to be doing at some point in your career? This is my needle gun.
Detective was a department that was created whenever we were in port.
Yeah. Yeah, but just remember, this is my needle gun. There are many like it, but this one is mine.
Mine, yeah.
I unfortunately got tasked with detective LPO title a few times. So,
Factard wants to know if you guys had to count the powder kegs and the cannonballs.
We pretty much. That's pretty much it too.
Hey, I was an artilleryman. I've got a cannon round behind me.
I was gonna say I have some 62 shells somewhere around here.
Yeah, too bad I wasn't allowed to bring any missiles home with me after being.
Well, we weren't allowed either, but we did it anyways.
You know what?
Mine are dummy rounds. They don't explode.
You know what I never understood about coming back into port from being on a deployment was the fact that we would have custom agents aboard, but none of them had anything higher than a confidential clearance, so they could never really check anywhere.
Right. We had to do a lot. It's an interesting story that we had. We actually did a drug bust. I may have told this story before. We actually did a drug bust, and it was one of the biggest drug busts that we had in that area at the time. It was pretty big. It was, I believe, it was cocaine. What it ended up being, and we're talking like 500 packages, and each package was, I mean, they were like, but they were like 50 pounds. Each one was like 50 pounds. It was huge. And we spent hours getting it transferring it from the other ship onto our ship. And because the only secure spaces that we had was where we store the ammunition and the weapons, we became responsible for all of those drugs. So we had to not only count them all as they came in, and once we had all of the drugs on board, we had to secure it and lock it, and nobody could enter into that one area. So we'd first have to pull out all of our ammunition that was in that one area and put it somewhere else temporarily, so we'd have access to it. And then those areas would be just for the drugs. It was interesting too, because my chief petty officer at the time, when we pulled in, he was so excited. He wanted to show these news crews about they wanted the pictures and the videos and everything else. And I actually had to stop them because the news crew was getting a tour, and he asked whether the reporter asked whether or not they could go in and see inside one of the storage areas. But that was one of our main areas that we had our it was underneath the mount for the 62 62 excuse me 86. And so we had all of the rounds in there and stuff like that. But what people don't realize is that is you have to have special clearance in order to go in there, where the design layouts and all of that stuff for that part of the boat is not supposed to be on the evening news. And so I had to actually tell my chief petty officer, no. The answer is no, you can't go in there. And they cannot go in and get a picture. Sorry. And he looked at me like he wanted to kill me, but I was like, no, they cannot go in there. Like, I don't care that I'm in E4.
It's requested access only, and the request wasn't put in, ergo request denied.
Regardless, denied. You do not have the clearance to allow that, and I don't care if you're a chief petty officer or what rank you are.
Oh, what I found interesting and kind of enjoyed at the same time, with the shop that I was in, there was always a space in the shop that was for ComSec, the secured communications equipment. There were times where I could tell a commander, no, you're not coming in here.
Yep.
Because the only person outside, at most there were 4 people outside of the shop who actually had authorization to be in the shop when that door was open or to go into that space. And that was, depending on where you were at, Shore Station, we actually had a OIC for the majority of the time, officer in charge, not a full commanding officer, or the commanding officer, or the department head, and one designated representative in QA, one QAO, quality assurance representative, actually had access to that room. Beyond that, there were people in the shop who weren't even allowed in that room.
Yep.
ComSec is no joke.
Yeah.
That's there's a reason why many, at least civilians, don't really realize this, but just because a person has a certain security clearance, for example, just take top secret, doesn't mean that anything that is classified as top secret is something that that person is allowed to look at or read.
Oh,
They
yeah,
have to have an actual purpose to use it.
Yeah, everything that's classified needs to know.
And it's not just needs to know. It's there's different. It's called SCI, secure compartmentalized information. You have to be read into each different compartment to be able to see what's in that compartment. And even if you have a top secret, it doesn't matter if you've been read on to 9 out of the 10 programs. If they're talking about the 10th program, you're leaving the room.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was
even
like,
if that certification is 1 day over.
Oh yeah, when it's expired, it's expired.
Yeah,
You're
too bad.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, too bad. Go away.
It was like a good example of that in an isolated environment would be we did a deep water like a submerged transit to the Straits of Gibraltar one time because we were basically going to trail a Russian battle group at the time. And when we did the transit, there were curtains put up around the attack center and around the plotters where the QMs were.
Because the rest of the crew didn't really need to know where they were.
Exactly.
And that's what I think the chief didn't really think about, I think. Not only was he trying to allow civilians to go into a place that you have to have a security clearance to go into, but also since he was in charge of, he was my chief, so he was a GMC, and he was in charge of all of that, but he can't overrule the fact that nobody is allowed to go into that space without the appropriate access, and his access is no longer valid because once those because we had locks and we had it locked out and we had it all under all the logs and things like that, you could not go in there until you had specific access to pull the drugs out, and it's getting counted as it's being pulled out again and weighed and everything else.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is a lot of some people don't think of it that way. It is a chain of custody issue at that point because it is.
You want to talk chain of custody? I could give you a class on fucking chain of custody. Jesus, let's not get started on that.
No,
and it won't be dry at all.
During one of my holdovers for a training thing, I was stuck as a Class 5 materials courier for Squadron 8. So.
Oh, so Coral, I have a question though. Were there any attractive females part of that news crew?
Negatory, Morning Glory.
Okay, so he wasn't trying to get laid.
No, he was. I really shouldn't speak out of turn. I should just. I was gonna say something, but
maybe he was.
Ask me a little later. I'll have a different.
Or maybe he was otherwise inclined.
Hey, you know.
No judgment.
I don't kink shame. Exactly. It was just. It would make sense that someone would want to try to use something like that.
It would not be about the gender. It would be about the. Never mind. No. We are no longer on live. I have a little tea to spill. But we'll put it this way. As I left the Coast Guard, he had a captain's mast. So,
which article number?
Mast?
Non-judicial punishment. So I'm thinking something about sodomy,
which for some stupid reason is still illegal in some countries.
Yeah, I don't understand.
The entire U.S. military.
During that time, it was don't ask, don't tell, and he didn't have to worry about that.
You didn't have to worry about telling because it was obvious.
I actually had someone on my first boat that I was on. It was a cook, and he was just everything about him was, I wish he could have
Screaming.
lived his best life, right? But he didn't. But he didn't hide who he was. But he couldn't talk about a lot of the things that everybody else could talk about. And anytime they talked about dating or anything like that, it was always just a gender neutral type term, so that way nobody could say anything, but everybody knew because we would go off to the drag clubs afterwards and hang out and chill, and he was a really cool dude. But then you get a really shitty, bigoted person that would come in and not and want to muck it up, and then all of a sudden that guy's gone and you're just like, seriously. He was doing nothing. He's a cook. He cooks some damn good cake, which is needed when morale is low and you're in the middle.
Fruitcake included. Yeah, I mean, that is just fucked up beyond. Well, just say FUBAR.
Yeah.
How the fuck would any military be allowed to control the personal lives of their
There is a
enlisted personnel and so on? Fuck off with that shit.
But at the same time,
unless it has a specific reason.
Yes, there is a psychological reason on why it was implemented and why it's still there. What they want to try to avoid is that dirtiness that could happen in a high-stress environment where if you are shacking up with someone of the same or opposite gender in the same command as you, and something goes wrong and there are potential injuries, they want to make sure that you will do what's best for the command, not your individual feelings for that other person.
Yeah, I mean, 8H was a big problem on board, obviously, because of the fact that we had a co-ed crew, and we actually had a lot of women on our we actually had a 20-man birthing area or I should say a 20-woman birthing area, and we had a 4-woman area as well, which is a lot for there's only 200 people on the boat, so we had a good portion of women on board. So we definitely had our share of 8H issues and things like that. And it wasn't fairly doled out because there's a lot of politics that go into those things. And then you also have the people that, and what I'm referring to is people that don't respect other people's boundaries. And think that just because you say cock and balls and shit and stuff that you're allowed to then be handsy and do inappropriate things to your underlings.
Hey,
And
those
why
people,
I have a
call
job.
them assholes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
No, Furbolt definitely had a point there. I want to make sure that other people heard it because
that's why I have a job.
Yeah.
To prevent those
are out there.
to prevent those handsy hands, don't get to do it more than once.
Ideally,
it's not my job. As a whole, it's all of our jobs to prevent the first time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to definitively prevent the second time, or at least allow it to happen when they're behind bars.
To them,
you can get handsy. Yeah, you can get handsy as you want once you're at Leavenworth.
well, as handsy as they'll let you there because once you do it there, it's not. It's not. Oh, we're gonna send you to someplace worse. It's no, you're staying here longer.
Yeah, and I've never had the joy of working at the Leavenworth office. We've got 3 people there. I don't want to. I send people there. I don't go there to work.
There is a reason why I have an aversion to letting soon-to-be prisoners being allowed to go into isolation from the get-go in those cases where they are rapists or child molesters. Hell no. They have to join the general population and make sure that, everybody will find out either way what they have done.
Well, here's the thing, and this is where for general prison populations, I actually agree with initial segregation on certain people, on certain convicts that are still going through trial.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But once the trial's over and sentencing has been given, gen pop with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that we can all agree that, especially the American prison system is completely fucked, and that it doesn't do rehabilitation.
No, it's not a rehabilitation.
Even though it says it on the label. Yeah.
It's not a rehabilitation system. It's a punishment system.
Nope.
Yep.
Eye for an eye.
A for-profit system.
That's why we have such a high recidivism rate in the U.S. So.
Yep.
Or one of the reasons. There's a stack of them, but well.
Yeah. Well, right. One of the many.
Yeah.
So.
For sure. But yeah. So. So fun times had by all.
But something to think about though. People want to give the American, the U.S. Civilian prison system a hard time. The military side gets to be even worse.
Oh yeah, it does.
Because there are certain rights that are afforded to you, even as a non-U.S. citizen, in the American legal system, as a civilian. If they deem you are a enemy combatant and decide to go through a military tribunal with you, right to a speedy trial? What's that mean? Sorry, I'd have to go with the other one right now. Oh God, what's he gonna grab now? Now remember, this is YouTube, not another site.
You're taking all of our fun away.
So we can go for this little guy.
Okay.
Or should we go with her?
Her. Although, what happens if you tip her upside down?
Her skirt does come up.
I can't really see.
For
is that
reasons.
Or
right
or fun bags?
As it should. As it should.
What the?
She's like a little space cop. Pew 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 with her laser. Pew pew.
Oh boy.
Well, being out in a microgravity environment would explain why at that size they're still quite perky.
Right.
Let's go nerdy. I'm pulling some random stuff off my shelf. Let's go nerdy.
All right. But does this saucer detach?
Where is the NX-01 though?
There you go.
If you don't have the NX-01, it's not complete.
This is just one. I don't have the rest of the collection. I've just got this guy. And it is cool. The saucer section does actually detach.
It is cool.
Ooh, and both of the Defiants. And I do believe that there are physical identifiers that you can use to distinguish between the two Defiants.
No. What you're thinking of, Bo, is the difference between the physical and the CGI model.
That could be it, yeah, because money and CGI costs, probably. Yeah.
I have rebuilt the Tantive 4 that I built right before I left Korea. So I just got that rebuilt. She's over on the shelf. My wife and I have been on a massive Lego rebuilding thing over the last month. I could reenact half of Star Wars in Lego.
Nice.
So upstairs, I still
almost
have
there.
the sand crawler to rebuild, Jabba's barge. We have the Rancor pit, but for some reason all the walls are like multicolored and rainbow. Thank you, children.
Yeah, just blame the kids. Right.
Oh, as soon as we bought the Rancor, my daughter had the Rancor tied up to the front of a carriage pulling princesses.
Nice. I like the way she thinks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh god, what caught his
I
attention
have like
now?
a 500-piece puzzle that is a model that we're putting together right now.
Oh, the shuttle Tiberium.
Enterprise.
Yeah, we got the
Now,
Tidarium.
is that the high-tech version that actually blinks and makes sounds and can?
It is not. This is just standard Lego
I
version.
remember having a TIE fighter that could actually move on its own as well.
Well, that's the Lego. That's Lego, not the actual like Star Wars. Like,
Yeah.
stand alone.
I need it. That's over 30 years ago too.
The old Falcon.
The first one, the better one.
What the hell happened to that thing?
It's called Lego.
It's the Lego.
Stickers. Yeah, but all those stickers on the back.
No,
What the?
no, those aren't stickers. Those are actual tiles.
Alright, I'll bring her back down.
Yeah.
Now, I should say that I am partial to the original Star Wars episodes 4, 5, and 6. Oh, nice.
She opens up nicely. Top comes off.
And
then you got the seat.
That's awesome.
Ooh, hey, Furball, that makes me remember something. You remember I kind of teed you off a little bit when I started, you showed off your Apollo, your Saturn V model.
Yeah, Saturn V.
Did you get that? Did you get your? Did you find? Make a decision whether or not you should buy the special effects kit for it?
No, I'm happy with it where it's at because it's already fallen off that shelf once, and that was fun enough to rebuild.
And just by breathing on it, you can separate it.
Oh no. The Saturn V is not that rickety, but the space station. Oh
yeah.
God, the space
ISS,
station.
yeah.
You look at it wrong and it'll fall apart. That is the one thing I will not pull off this shelf to show you guys because it will get destroyed in the 2 steps between here and there.
Yeah, I realize the risk of sacrilege here, but have you contemplated using a little bit of cyanoacrylate on it?
No.
Or super glue?
No.
I knew it was a touchy subject. But hey, I'm allowed to say stuff like that because I live literally less than 30 minutes away from the original factory.
So that would keep it together, but then if you had to move it.
Yeah, and my kids want to play with it enough. Over there, I've got
it's Lego.
I've got the Simpsons house, a couple Harry Potter stuff, the original in pieces, Ecto 1.
Nice.
This one we've still got to find all the parts for.
What about the shuttle? Yeah, I've had that one.
You know what? That's almost like a Batmobile.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
I do not have the shuttle, but I have a fairly accurate representation of the shuttle upstairs in pieces. That's another one that's got to be rebuilt.
So it looks more like the Buran than the space shuttle, maybe?
Probably, yeah.
Which, was, although it only flew once unmanned, it was more cool than the American space shuttle by that perfect landing plus the final approach and so on while being unmanned. But
now that I don't have an office to keep all my random shit in, that's all around this office.
Oh, have they started making the SpaceX rockets too?
I have not seen any.
The Dragon capsules and so on?
The Dragon capsule, no, but I have heard of there being Falcon models available. Your camera went black. What are you grabbing now? Not you, Furball. Tech.
Yeah, I turned on mine so you can peer into my background. I'm gonna go grab a beer.
Oh no, I'm transforming. So
you don't want us to see the fun bit?
no, it takes a little bit.
But yeah, I actually somewhere amongst all my stuff, I still have a couple Lego sets. The predominantly the B-wing and X-wing. First run of the X-wing when it was still actually not the Technic version, not the new upgraded bastardization version, but the
I've got the Poe Dameron version.
No, see, I have the original Luke version from late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, because it was when the prequel trilogy was going through the theaters.
I don't have any Legos, although we've been talking about getting some. We're just doing the models. That was what we were doing. But
how do you like my Christmas tree topper?
Hey, as long as someone keeps watching it.
Hey,
just remember, don't blink.
Yep, don't blink.
Also, the eternal pedantic in me, the pedantic asshole in me, needs to say that there is no such thing as.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
There is no such thing as Legos. Well, it's Lego, as in the acronym for play well.
So
hey,
Sean,
it's a matter of national pride.
So Sean Carroll says, "I've built a Lego Bastion. I love my Wally pseudo murder bot." Okay, Sean, you're gonna need to get
Bastion?
a Bastion. Yes, he
I was thinking.
So Sean, I know you're on Twitter. Take a picture of this murder robot and post it there.
Yeah, we need to see.
Before you elaborated there, Jared, I thought you meant a Lego model of MOB Bastion. Which threw me for a loop for a second there.
Every time I hear Bastion, I think of Neverending Story.
Bastion! What's my name?
My name.
Okay,
I love that. I love that movie, but that is one of the dumbest plots ever. If you could just cut that 2 minutes out of the movie, it would be a perfect movie.
It really would, honestly. Wait
a minute. Wait. Perfect movie.
It's so good.
Perfect kids movie.
Hang on. It doesn't have. No, it doesn't have David Bowie in the best role he could play as the Goblin King.
You remind me of the Babe.
What Babe?
The Babe with the power.
What power?
Not Babe Ruth, but the little
the power of voodoo.
Voodoo?
Babe with a little piglet?
You do.
Not even.
What?
Oh, man.
Remind me of the Babe.
Are we showing our age again?
Yes, you are.
Crying hard as Babe could
Jared,
cry.
You are a child.
I do. I wish I knew the words to that, because then I would sing it.
Okay.
He's got it. Eric's got it.
Okay, because he showed it in the actual transform version. It was like, okay, random transformer. Oh, it's the Ecto one. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, you see, last year was, there was a couple years ago, it was the 35th anniversary of both Transformers and it was last year. It was 35th anniversary of both Transformers and Ghostbusters. So Hasbro made a transforming Ecto 1.
That is amazing.
Nice.
I love that so much.
I mean, the mix of Alien and Predators was awesome. That was perfect. But Transformers and Ghostbusters.
Yeah, his name is Ectotron.
I want to see that as a movie, though.
Right? Like, this needs to be a movie. I don't know what the storyline is, but I need it in my life.
No. Anamorphic Mind has it right. I thought it was a pre-op Transformer.
Oh boy.
And you know what? They even got the proper Transformers logo on it. Yeah.
Trannies in disguise. No, that wouldn't work there. Hey, in my world, a tranny is a transistor, so calm down.
Hey, you say that too many times, you might just invoke a reappearance of Russian vids.
Hey, I would have that more than I would have a second bastardization of the universe that is Ghostbusters. I'm still waiting for the third Ghostbusters movie, by the way. The actual third Ghostbusters movie.
Weren't they supposed to be working on that before?
They are working, yeah.
So they are still going forward with it.
I imagine. They're probably on a shutdown right now, but
I think that already had a release date.
They did. It's been pushed back. Like, it was already supposed to. It was initially going to be coming out.
Was it
sometime
this
summer? Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's like been pushed into like early next year.
Damn you, COVID.
Well, it's like they're
I'm
still.
waiting for the new Fast
What
and
is it?
Furious.
Ghostbusters Afterlife. That's the name of it.
Yep.
Well,
it is now slated for 5 March 2021.
Wow, and damn. Now, what about?
It was scheduled to release in July.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Wonder Woman 1984 currently is slated for August.
I'll be surprised.
On the hopes that theaters are open again.
Yeah.
Hey,
and people are willing to go.
To wait for the good things in life. You know.
I think it'll be pushed until next year.
Here's a good conversation. Several movies have gone direct to home release. Trolls 2 being one of them, and Trolls 2 fucking killed at the home box office.
Yep.
It did absolutely amazing. There are other, so it's proof that an audience will follow you even if they're paying from home. But there are certain production companies and producers and directors that want the theater experience.
Yes,
I
because
understand that.
because there are partnerships between studios and certain theater chains.
That's a different story. What I'm talking about, if you erase that, because we can have that conversation next. But where is that line drawn for the type of movie that you feel you need a theater experience? Because I think Trolls was a great movie. We rented it for $20 the first weekend it came out because my kids wanted to see it, and I was totally happy watching that at home on my couch. Where do you draw that line?
So
I didn't even know that it was a movie. I just know it as a toy.
No, they've made 2 movies now where those toys are the characters on screen.
Oh boy, that sounds like it. Yeah,
it
actually move to create.
It's actually been well done.
I have a different opinion on it because of, I guess, when I grew up, because in my teenage years we lived at the movie theaters, and like it did not matter, we were there as often as we could, and but by the time I got old enough, I got tired of being stuck in a theater. Like, I love the movie experience where you have the surround sound and you have like just the feeling of a really amazing, like, immersive experience with, say, something like Star Wars or something like Avatar, and something that is just, you really want to be inside that world. And it's definitely a lot different than if you're watching something like I don't know, Secret Life of Pets or Trolls or something along those lines. But as the technology has gotten better, I prefer to be at home with my home surround sound and my home TV and not have to worry about people being rude around you, people bringing in their little fucking kids into rated R movies at 10 p.m. at night
on a weekday.
Last showing, on a Thursday. And I mean, one time I went into I think it was like a slasher film where it's like definitely rated R, lots of blood, gore, and everything else, and about 5 or 6 like 10-year-old girls get put in. Their dad put them into one of the seats and all they were doing was just shrilling the entire time, and it just makes it so it is not it's a miserable experience. And
I have never seen that here.
No,
people.
I agree with her because, like, when I saw Deadpool, when I went to see Deadpool, there was like a parent that brought in like 3 kids, like a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 7-year-old.
Hang on. My view of it goes to this, and this actually ends up being a deterrent to assholes like that. If the movie is set in a place that warrants being an IMAX release, then I will still go out to the theater and watch it there on an IMAX screen. Not
there's projections. Yes.
There's a caveat to that, though, Jared. So, Coral, I absolutely get that. I've had some shitty experiences with. It seems like if it's a great movie, I'm gonna have a shitty experience.
Yeah.
If it's a decent movie, it's gonna be a good experience.
Yeah.
So when I went to Les Mis, yes, fanboy, I love Les Mis.
Better than I expected it to be.
As you should.
I've seen it in theater on Broadway like 4 times, twice in London. Love it. But when that movie came out, I was so excited. My kids were excited, and there were 2 people sitting.
Oh, it's the worst.
It's like, why are you even here? I mean, this isn't even a movie that should attract you to come in.
There is a reason.
You should have as a something to snack on, because they hit a lot harder.
Damn you,
than
Bo. Hang on. Hang on.
With
mentioned movie night, and now OBS is fucking up again.
So with the shitty experience, so good movie, shitty experience. And then Jared mentions IMAX.
Yep.
Jared mentioned IMAX. I went to the last Star Wars movie in IMAX. I detested.
Incredible, yeah.
I fucking detested the one before it. It made me want to shoot myself in the face. And it wanted me to shoot Ryan Johnson in the face.
You guys do know that they're not hearing any of this right now?
I'm still having a conversation with you, though.
They're lucky to hear us.
But when we went to the last Star Wars, went to it in IMAX. And as great as that could be, IMAX movies are fucking loud. My kids had to wear headphones because it was so loud. And just so you know, if you didn't realize this, the new movie coming out, Tenet. Have you seen the previews for that?
Nope.
It's really weird. It's a producer that does weird type movies. There was a 10-minute violent preview